I will try to answer the question of who was the first neuroscientist, which is a simple question if you ask it that plainly, and the simple answer is his name was Santiago Ramón y Cajal. But if you look at who he was as a person, his career, and why he was so impactful, it gets a lot more interesting. And I'll start by talking about who he was growing up. He was born on the 1st of May in 1852 in the city of Petilla de Aragon in Navarre, Spain. He was quite unique as a child when considering scientists of his time. Since he was a rebellious and problematic child, he often had to switch schools, and he was actually imprisoned when he was 11 for destroying his neighbor's yard gate with a homemade cannon. He also wasn't actually interested in science as a kid. He was more interested in things like art and gymnastics. His father didn't like that, however. He was an anatomy teacher at the University of Zaragoza, and he wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. He tried to convince him by taking him on trips to the graveyard to find bones to study, which is weird, but it worked since Ramón y Cajal did enroll at the University of Zaragoza, where he graduated in medicine in 1873, after which he joined the Spanish army for a brief time since he went on an expedition to Cuba and had to return shortly after since he contracted malaria and tuberculosis. After recovering, he pursued his doctorate at the University of Madrid, which he received in 1877. And 2 years later, he became the director of the Anatomical Museum at the University of Zaragoza. He would work at the University of Zaragoza until 1883, when he was awarded the position of anatomy professor at the University of Valencia. In those years, his work focused on histology, the study of microscopic structures in tissue, and he worked on things such as the pathology of inflammation, the microbiology of cholera, and the structure of epithelial cells and tissues. In 1887, he received a professorship at the University of Barcelona, where he would begin his work on the neuroscience which he is today most famous for. In 1892, he received his last professorship at the University of Madrid and became the director of the National Institute of Hygiene in 1899. Later in life, in 1922, he founded the Laboratory of Biological Investigations, which was later renamed the Cajal Institute. Before talking about his accomplishments, I will first talk about the state in which the early neuroscience of his time was in, since that is detrimental in explaining why his impact was so great. Today, we might have things like electron microscopes and fluorescent staining techniques, which allow us to get a really clear picture of the brain and its components. However, at the time, those things weren't yet invented. There was still a lot of open questions. It was not even really known what nervous tissue was made of. It was only evident that it was made of densely packed fibers, but researchers still couldn't tell what their arrangement, function, or purpose was. Unsurprisingly, there were a lot of conflicting ideas about what the nature of the brain might be. One popular doctrine was the reticular theory, which was favored by, most importantly, Camillo Golgi, who I will talk about in a second as well. The reticular theory stated that the nervous system is a dense and continuous net, essentially one really long network of nerve fibers. Another doctrine or theory which Ramón y Cajal believed in was the neuron theory, which stated that the nervous system is not one really long continuous network, but rather made of individual cells called neurons, which are connected. There was, however, an important new invention at the time, which was made by Golgi, which was his black staining technique, which used primarily potassium chromate and silver nitrate to stain single nerve fibers while leaving their surroundings unstained. This was an important technological breakthrough since it at first allowed biologists to actually take a full look at a singular neuron and explain what might be happening. Now, Harmony Cajal used Golgi's method a lot and even improved on it. He would use it to make a lot, and really a lot, of sketches of his findings. He released them between 1899 and 1904 in a three-volume work which he titled The Texture of the Nervous System of Man and Vertebrates. These books are full of illustrations which are still used today for their incredible detail, as well as just being beautiful art. His work gave him a lot of unique insight, which went far beyond of the current doctrines of physiology of the time, which allowed him to make many groundbreaking discoveries, which he is today known for. Among his many accomplishments is the discovery of the axonal growth cone, as well as the interstitial cell of Cajal, which is important for the muscles of your gut. He was also an advocate for the existence of dendritic spines, even though he didn't recognize that they were the site of contact from presynaptic cells. He even proposed the polarization of the nerve cell function, which a student of his turned into cable theory. These findings were the basis for the neuron doctrine, which is the foundation of today's neuroscience, and although he wasn't the first one to propose it, he was the first one to bring a large amount of evidence supporting it. He and Camillo Golgi were jointly granted the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1906, showing that they both had major contribution to the advancement of neuroscience, although they believed in different doctrines. Harmony Cajal's findings are the basis of common knowledge today. However, at his time they were revolutionary and groundbreaking. And you could not overstate how much of today's knowledge and practice can be attributed to him. His contributions were not only many new insights and data points, but he also actively challenged a lot of existing doctrines which were quite popular at the time, and he allowed science to move beyond their limitations. The reason why his insights were so beyond current scope was definitely his special approach to his studies. He was not only a neuroscientist, he was also interested in related fields such as psychology and philosophy. These interests allow him to take a wider view at a time when biologists were focused on isolating the phenomena that they were studying. Harmony Cajal believed that in order to understand the brain, one must always keep the big picture in mind and not treat neuroscience as a study of unrelated small phenomena. He also realized that the brain is a construction of many neural circuits, which all have their own function and are connected in a complex structure. He also proposed that we have to understand the brain through evolutionary and etiological contexts in which it has developed. So, who was Santiago Harmony Cajal? He was a unique man whose many talents and interests all manifested themselves into the greatest neuroscientific mind we have yet seen. When he began his career, neuroscience was still in its infancy, and he was quite literally its father who raised it. His unique approach and many insights are still the basis of neuroscience today, almost 1.5 centuries later. It is rare in science that so much can be traced back to one person alone, but Santiago Harmony Cajal is one of those rarities.